hadn't even sat down yet when I heard it. She's just here for the free food. Nobody wants to sit next to her anyway. The words sliced through the noise of Thanksgiving chatter like a sharp knife through turkey. And they came from my own granddaughter. Tessa. 16. Blonde like her mother, sharp-tongued like her father. My son. I stood frozen in the dining room, holding a warm dish of sweet potatoes that I'd baked from scratch, the way my mother used to, back when holidays still felt like holidays. No one stopped her. No one corrected her. In fact, a few heads turned, and then turned away, pretending they hadn't heard. My daughter-in-law, Kelly, laughed. "Teenagers, right?" she said to no one in particular. But I caught the smirk. I caught the way she didn't even glance in my direction. I lowered the dish onto the counter slowly, carefully, like setting down something fragile, even though I was the one cracking. The table was full. Every chair had a name card. My name wasn't among them. In fact, the only chair left sat slightly off to the side, near the back door. Close enough to feel the draft. Far enough that I'd have to pass the trash bin every time I stood up. And yet, I smiled. Or at least I tried. Because when you've been called bitter and lonely enough times, you start to believe that being invisible is safer. But even then, as I pulled out the folding chair and sat in silence, something in me stayed awake. Something that had been too quiet for too long. The kids passed around rolls and cranberry sauce without even glancing my way. At one point, I reached for the gravy boat, and my son Matt shifted it just out of reach without a second thought. Not rudely, not on purpose maybe, but like I wasn't there. Like he didn't even register me as someone who'd want gravy on her plate. My hand lingered in the air a second longer than it should have. Then I set it down on my lap. I watched as Kelly raised her glass for a toast, thanking her parents for driving in from Ohio. She even gave a small shout-out to their neighbor for bringing pecan pie. But she didn't mention me. Not once. Even though I brought 3 dishes. Even though I held Matt's hand through 2 rounds of layoffs and helped raise their kids while they built their careers. Even though the silver candlesticks flickering on their table had once belonged to my mother. Passed down to me and then given to them the day they bought their first home. I sat in that cold chair, chewing through stuffing and shame, and all I could think was, when did I stop being part of this family? No one made a scene. No one yelled. But the silence was loud. The kind that hums in your ears and settles in your bones. The kind that makes you feel like you're watching your life happen from a seat nobody wanted you in. And then, I felt a pair of eyes on me. I turned, and there he was, standing just beyond the archway to the kitchen. Isaac, my youngest grandson. Only 9 years old, wearing a red flannel shirt 2 sizes too big and holding a crumpled paper napkin. He didn't say anything, just looked at me. And in that look, I saw it. The question he was too young to put into words: why do they treat you like that? There's a funny thing about sacrifice. You don't always notice you're making it until someone acts like it never mattered. Matt was only 6 when his father died. A silent heart attack in his sleep. No warning, no goodbyes, just a cold January morning and a husband who didn't wake up. I remember sitting on the edge of our bed, still in my flannel nightgown, holding the phone in one hand and his wedding ring in the other. And I remember looking at Matt, standing in the doorway, confused, clutching a stuffed bear too tight. That was the day I stopped being someone's wife and started becoming someone's everything. I took a job at the public library 3 towns over. It paid less than the grocery store, but gave me nights and weekends off, so I could be there when Matt got off the school bus. We lived on coupons and casseroles. Some nights, dinner was boxed mac and cheese and green beans from a can. But the lights stayed on, and the boy kept growing. When he needed braces, I started tutoring kids in math, even though I hadn't touched an equation since high school. When his field trip fund came up short, I baked pies and sold them at the farmer's market every Saturday. People came back for the crust. Said it tasted like home. Still, those weren't the hardest sacrifices. The hardest was the one no one knew about. Years later, when Matt and Kelly were just starting out, young, broke, expecting their first child, he called me late one night. Said they needed help with the hospital deposit, or else Kelly would have to transfer to a clinic 2 hours away. I had just gotten the insurance settlement from a car accident. A careless driver had rear-ended me while I waited at a red light. I had planned to use the check to repair the roof of the old house. Water was leaking through a corner in the attic every time it rained. But I told him yes. Didn't even hesitate. I remember driving over in the dark, slipping the envelope of cash into his mailbox, and then driving away before anyone saw me. He never asked how I had it, and I never told him the attic kept leaking for 2 more winters. When Kelly went back to school to finish her master's, they asked if I could help out more with the boys. I was retired by then, or at least I thought I was. But I said yes. Again. I took on a few babysitting jobs around the neighborhood just to cover gas money, packed lunches in the morning, changed diapers in the afternoon, and read bedtime stories at night, half of which I never finished because someone always called me back for just one more thing. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. It was love, the way I knew how to give it. There was a year when Isaac, the youngest, got diagnosed with a mild sensory disorder. Nothing severe, but loud noises bothered him, certain fabrics itched his skin, and transitions, like going from home to school, often ended in tears. So every morning before kindergarten, I'd come over early just to sit with him on the porch swing for a few minutes. We had a routine: banana bread, fuzzy socks, and a story about a hedgehog who hated getting his paws wet. It calmed him, made him smile. Matt never asked why the swing smelled like cinnamon for a whole year, or who kept restocking the laundry room with his favorite detergent when their budget got tight, or why the pantry never ran out of peanut butter crackers. But that was okay. I wasn't doing it for the thank you. There's a kind of love that just shows up. Quiet, constant, like background music in a movie scene that no one remembers, until it's gone. Even when I was sick, I kept it quiet. I had a lump in my neck for nearly 6 months before I finally saw a doctor. Turned out it was benign, thank God. But I never told the kids. Didn't want to worry them. Didn't want to be seen as fragile. I had built my whole life around protecting them from worry, from stress, from even the hint that they might owe me something. And yet, I remember one winter, the furnace broke. It was the coldest snap in years, and I didn't want to ask for help. So I wore 2 sweaters to bed, boiled water on the stove, and slept with hand warmers tucked into my socks. Matt never knew. Kelly never asked, and I never said a word, because somehow, over the years, I had started believing that being needed was the same thing as being loved. Only now, decades later, I was beginning to understand. They hadn't needed me in a long time, and maybe they hadn't loved me for even longer. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing about being pushed out. It's never loud. It's quiet, gentle, like steam slipping through a crack before the kettle screams. The first time I felt it was during Halloween. I brought over a handmade costume for Isaac, a little hedgehog, just like the one from our porch stories. Spent hours stitching the back, gluing soft spikes made from felt, even sewed in a zipper so he wouldn't need help getting it on. But when I rang the bell, Kelly opened the door with a smile that never reached her eyes. "Oh," she said, holding up a store-bought Spider-Man suit. "He's already picked this one." I held the hedgehog costume for a second longer, then handed it over anyway. "Maybe next year," I mumbled. She never took it out of the bag. And then came the Thanksgiving planning. I offered to host. I'd even started polishing the silver my mother had passed down, just in case. But Matt responded in the family group chat with, "Let's just keep it simple." Kelly's parents already offered. Not a no, but not a yes either. Just enough to remind me of where I stood. I didn't argue. Just texted back a thumbs-up emoji and spent the rest of the evening scrubbing out the casserole dishes I'd planned to use. Still, I told myself it was just a misstep, a misunderstanding, that maybe if I stayed kind, stayed quiet, they'd remember. But December arrived with a snowstorm and a truth I couldn't shovel away. I found out through Facebook that the family had gone up to a ski cabin for Christmas. The photos showed them bundled up, smiling beside a tree, mugs of cocoa in hand, matching pajamas, Matt in a goofy Santa hat, Kelly toasting marshmallows, Isaac laughing. No one had said a word to me, not even a text. I sat on my couch that morning with a mug of tea that had long gone cold. No fireplace, no string lights, just silence. The kind that makes your bones feel old. And yet, I still made their favorite coffee cake. Still set out the plate in case someone dropped by. Still kept the porch light on. No one came. Not that day, not the day after, not for weeks. In January, Matt finally called, not to ask how I was, not to apologize for Christmas. He needed help watching the boys again. Kelly had taken on more shifts at the hospital, and their new babysitter had quit. I said yes. Of course I said yes, because a part of me still hoped that maybe if I kept showing up, one day they'd start seeing me again. But something shifted that winter. Isaac started calling me Miss Nora instead of Grandma. At first I thought he was just being silly, some new phase, a joke from school. But then I heard Kelly say it one afternoon, almost absent-mindedly, "Be nice to Miss Nora, she doesn't have anyone else." She said it like it was kindness. She said it in front of me. And Matt, he didn't correct her. He didn't even flinch. He just looked at his phone and asked if I could stay an extra hour. That night, I went home and stared at myself in the mirror. I traced the lines around my mouth, the silver roots growing at my temples, the skin on my hands that used to look like my mother's. I used to believe that aging with grace meant staying humble, staying small, staying out of the way. But standing there in the flickering bathroom light, I didn't feel graceful. I felt erased. The last straw came in March. Isaac had a school play, something about forest animals. He was cast as a hedgehog. He didn't know I'd seen the flyer on the fridge, or that I showed up early and stood in the back of the auditorium behind the tall man with the beanie and the mother holding a crying toddler. I didn't mind. I was used to the edges of rooms. What I wasn't used to was hearing Kelly talk about me. She sat 2 rows ahead, whispering to another mom. "Matt's mother? Oh, we don't really include her in things. She gets intense, kind of clings to the kids. It's sad, really." And the other mom just nodded. Just nodded. Like I was a burden, like I was a story to sigh about, not a person who once stayed up every night during Matt's colic phase, who once walked 5 miles in the snow to buy Kelly her favorite tea when she was sick with morning sickness. I left before Isaac came on stage. I didn't want him to see me cry. I walked out through the parking lot, past minivans and ice patches and the faint sound of applause. When I got to my car, I sat there for a long time, hands on the wheel, engine off. I didn't scream, didn't curse, didn't even sob. I just stopped. Stopped pretending that one more coffee cake, one more babysitting shift, one more holiday plate would change anything. Stopped believing that being quiet would earn me respect. Stopped shrinking. And for the first time in a very long time, I started thinking about that little lake house I'd bought years ago, almost by accident. The one I never told anyone about. The one I used to visit on the loneliest weekends, just to paint the porch and pretend the world was softer than it was. I hadn't stepped foot in it in almost a year. But suddenly, I wanted to see it again. I wanted to remember who I was before I became someone they pitied, someone they ignored, someone they spoke about in whispers like a problem to manage, because I wasn't bitter and I wasn't lonely, I was just done being invisible. It started with a list, nothing dramatic, just names, dates, notes scribbled in a yellow legal pad I kept tucked beside the toaster. The kind of pad most people wouldn't look twice at. But I filled it slowly, carefully, like I was drawing the blueprints of my own rescue. First thing on the list? The lake house. I hadn't been there in almost a year. Last time, I'd swept leaves off the porch and left a mason jar of dried lavender in the windowsill. It was still standing, still sturdy, still mine. Bought 15 years ago, back when my sister passed and left me a modest inheritance. I hadn't told anyone, not because I was hiding it, but because no one asked where I went when I needed space. And that little cabin on the lake, it had always been just enough space to breathe. I drove up one afternoon in April. The trees were still bare, but the sky was clear. I opened every window, let the breeze roll in. It smelled like pine and quiet, like no one expected anything from me here. No dishes, no errands, no soft apologies for taking up space. I spent the weekend cleaning, rearranging furniture, repainting the front step. I found old curtains in the closet and hung them just because I could. And then I did something I hadn't done in decades. I danced, barefoot on the old hardwood floor. Music from my phone echoing in the empty living room. No one to roll their eyes, no one to call me silly, just me and the echo of my own laughter. I drove back to town on Monday morning, but something had changed. I didn't feel like a guest in my own life anymore. I felt like someone with a choice. So I started making them. I stopped offering before they asked. I stopped texting first. I stopped babysitting just for a bit while Kelly ran errands. When Matt asked if I could swing by and help with the boys during spring break, I said, "I'll be out of town." He didn't ask where. He didn't say he'd miss me. And I didn't offer it. I called a lawyer next. Her name was Lydia, and she sounded younger than I expected, but sharp. The kind of sharp that didn't cut, but clarified. I told her about the house Matt and Kelly were living in, how it had been mine before the title was transferred to family trust, a trust I still had a legal stake in. The paperwork hadn't been touched in years, but legally, I still had a say. "I'm not trying to evict anyone," I said quietly, "but I want them to remember whose shoulders they've been standing on." Lydia didn't blink. "We'll draft a letter," she said. Nothing threatening, just firm. The letter went out the following week. Polite, professional, but firm. It stated in legal terms that the family home was held jointly under a trust with stipulations that had not been reviewed nor renewed in over a decade. That I, as the primary grantor, retained the right to dissolve that trust if I so wished, especially if I was not residing in the property, nor receiving equal benefit from it. I didn't expect fireworks, or rage, or even a fight. And I didn't get one. What I got was silence. Matt didn't call. Kelly didn't text. A week passed. Then two. And then, one afternoon, I received a carefully worded email from Kelly. "We were just surprised to hear from a lawyer. We didn't think it was necessary to go that route. Maybe we can sit down and discuss what's really going on." I stared at that sentence for a long time. What's really going on? As if the last decade had been some misunderstanding. As if being erased in my own family required translation. I didn't respond. Instead, I sent out my own email. A different kind. I sent invitations. To cousins I hadn't seen in years. To old church friends. To the neighbor down the block who always waved even when no one else did. I even called an old friend from high school, Darlene, who had retired upstate and spent her days baking pies and judging local poetry contests. "I'm hosting Easter at the lake house this year," I said to each one. "Just something simple, nothing big, but I'd love if you came." And people said yes. Not out of pity, not out of obligation, but because they wanted to. That Sunday, the lake house smelled like cinnamon and rosemary. I strung lights between the trees, set up folding tables on the back porch. I served ham, 3 kinds of potatoes, and a strawberry tart that Darlene swore tasted like the 1980s. Laughter echoed across the water. Someone played guitar. Someone else brought deviled eggs in a glass dish shaped like a chicken. And then, just after sunset, a familiar car pulled up. "Matt?" He walked halfway down the gravel path before stopping. He wasn't holding anything. No dish, no flowers, just his phone in one hand and Isaac 10 steps behind, dragging his feet. I met them on the lawn. "Hey," Matt said. I said nothing. "We weren't sure if—" "You're not on the guest list," I replied calmly. "But I made extra. You can eat if you like, then you'll have to go." He looked stunned. And Kelly? She never showed. Isaac, though, he looked up at me, and then he smiled, like he was seeing me for the first time in months. He leaned in and whispered, "Can I stay a little longer?" And I bent down to his height and said, "Sweetheart, you can stay as long as you want. This is my house now." He nodded, and took off running toward the fire pit, where someone was handing out marshmallows. I stood there a minute longer, watching the shadows flicker across the lake. For the first time in years, I wasn't sitting at the edge of someone else's table. I had built my own, and this time I had picked every chair. The Monday after Easter, Kelly showed up at my front door. Not the one in town. The lake house. She didn't knock right away, just stood on the porch like she wasn't sure whether to be angry or embarrassed. I watched her through the window, then opened the door without saying a word. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice sharper than she probably meant. I stepped aside. She didn't sit, just paced, her arms crossed tight, mouth pinched. "We got your second letter," she finally said. I nodded. She looked around, eyes landing on the fresh flowers on the table, the soft curtains swaying in the breeze, the smell of lemon and rosemary still lingering from the weekend. "I don't understand what you're doing," she said, jaw clenching. "This is just mean." I raised an eyebrow. "I gave you and Matt everything," I said, calm as rain. "Time, money, my name on that deed. And in return, I was treated like an obligation, like background noise. Kelly flinched. I took care of your children, your house. I was your backup plan every time life got hard. And the moment I asked for a seat at the table, you rolled your eyes and called me intense. That was, she started, but I held up a hand. No need to explain. I heard you, and I finally decided to believe you. She sank into the chair then, like her legs gave out. What happens now? She whispered. I walked to the counter, poured her a glass of water, and set it down gently in front of her. What happens, I said softly, is that I'll be selling my stake in the house. Not to a developer, not to someone looking to flip it, just to someone who'll live in it, as a home, because that's what it used to be. Kelly paled. You're kicking us out. I shook my head. No, I'm giving you time, 90 days, long enough to find somewhere else. Longer if Isaac needs to finish out the school year. But after that, I'm reclaiming what's mine. Her eyes welled up. Matt doesn't know yet, she said, almost childlike. He still thinks you'll change your mind. I looked out the window at the lake, the sun glinting off the water like a secret waiting to be shared. Then he doesn't know me at all, I said. Kelly left that day without finishing her water. Didn't say goodbye, didn't slam the door, just walked down the porch steps like she'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. I didn't watch her go. I didn't need to. 2 weeks later, Matt called. His voice was tight, like he'd rehearsed every word, like it wasn't a conversation, just a monologue with a timer on it. Mom, he said, I know things have been tense, but the house is where the boys grew up. It's all they know. I didn't interrupt. We can pay you rent, he continued. Fair market rate. We'll put it in writing. You can still see the kids. Maybe we just got off track. I let the silence settle. Then I asked one question. Do you remember what Isaac called me last Thanksgiving? Matt hesitated. What? He called me Miss Nora. There was a pause, and then softer. Yeah, I guess. I thought it was just a phase. It wasn't a phase, I said. It was a reflection of how your household sees me, of what they hear, of what they're taught. He exhaled, but it wasn't surrender. It was frustration. You're really going through with this? He asked. After everything? Yes, I said gently. Because of everything. The line went quiet. He didn't hang up, but he didn't speak again. And that, somehow, was the clearest thing he'd ever said. By the end of June, the moving truck came. I didn't go to the house, didn't peek through curtains, didn't drive by. But Darlene did. She called that evening, her voice giddy like a teenager. They looked miserable, she whispered like it was a secret. Kelly in leggings and Matt trying to stuff a recliner that clearly wasn't going to fit. I chuckled. Not out of spite, but out of closure. They'll land on their feet, I said. They always do. A few days later, I got a letter. Handwritten. No return address, but I recognized the penmanship. It was from Isaac. Inside was a short note, written in pencil and carefully erased in places. Dear Grandma, I'm sorry I called you Miss Nora. I didn't know it hurt. I just thought it was what we were supposed to say. But I like calling you Grandma better. You always felt like one, even when you weren't there. Thank you for the stories and the hedgehog and the swing and the warm socks. I remember everything. Love, Isaac. I folded the letter slowly, held it in both hands. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers through a child's handwriting. Through a sentence without edits. Through the space where love grows back. That summer, I framed the letter and placed it on the mantel. Right next to a sign I carved from driftwood. It said, I gave you everything. Now I'm giving you freedom from me. The first snowfall came early that year. It dusted the pine branches outside my lake house like powdered sugar, soft and silent. I lit the fireplace before the sun went down, set the kettle to boil, and folded linen napkins with trembling fingers that no longer feared stillness. I didn't decorate much, just a wreath, a string of warm white lights, and 3 candlesticks on the mantel. One for peace, one for memory, and one for forgiveness. By 7 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Darlene arrived first, wearing a red scarf and holding a peach cobbler she called ugly but honest. Then a man I hadn't seen since choir days who somehow remembered my favorite tea. And then, the knock I wasn't expecting. I opened the door and there she was. Tessa, 17 now, taller, a little softer around the eyes. Her coat was too big, her hair tied back, no phone in her hand, just a small box wrapped in brown paper. I wasn't sure if I should come, she said, but Isaac said it'd be okay. I stepped aside. She didn't walk in right away, just looked around the room. The wood beams, the pine-scented candles, the photo of her grandfather I kept near the window. "I remember him," she said quietly. "He used to let me sit on his lap during grace." I nodded. "I remember that too." She reached into her coat and pulled out a folded envelope. "It's not a card," she said quickly. "It's just, I wrote something. Back in October, I didn't give it to you 'cause I didn't think you'd want it. I didn't open it. I didn't need to, not yet. Instead, I took her coat, hung it near the fire, and said, 'There's a chair by the window. I saved it in case someone brave showed up.'" And she smiled. A small one, but real. Later that night, as the room filled with laughter and music and too many coats for one hook, Isaac tugged gently on my sleeve. "She remembered," he whispered. "Thanksgiving. She told me in the car. She remembered what she said to you, and she felt bad, real bad." I looked across the room. Tessa was helping Darlene slice the cobbler, placing each piece gently on mismatched plates. And I felt something lift. Not revenge, not satisfaction, just relief. Like a wound that had finally scabbed over, tender but healing. By the time the last candle burned low, the room had quieted into something gentler, the kind of silence that doesn't demand to be filled. I stood by the window with a cup of cider, watching the snow fall like the world was finally exhaling. No one rushed to leave. No one looked at their phones. Tessa had fallen asleep on the couch, Isaac curled up beside her like they were 5 again, not old enough to roll their eyes yet. Darlene tucked a quilt over them without a word. And me? I wasn't lonely, not bitter, not forgotten. I was full of warmth, of breath, of the kind of peace that doesn't need to be explained. Some mornings I still wake up early, not out of habit or fear, but out of peace. The kind that settles deep in your chest when you know, finally, truly, that you're no longer fighting to be seen in rooms that were never built for you. Instead, I open the blinds, I brew tea. I sit on the porch with a sweater too big and a heart just big enough. Sometimes I write, sometimes I bake, sometimes I just exist. And that's enough. To anyone watching this, if you've ever been called bitter, too much, or just in the way, if you've ever felt erased or made small or silenced, I want you to know there's still a place for you. Even if you have to build it with your own hands. Even if it's just a kitchen table with mismatched chairs and the sound of laughter that wasn't there before. You matter. Not because of what you give, not because of what you sacrifice, but because you are here. And if this story touched something in you, leave a comment. Share it with someone who might need to hear this. Or maybe, just maybe, send it to the version of yourself who almost gave up. And if you feel brave enough, you're always welcome at my table by the lake.